earthquake in Virginia this week. One man was caught on video sliding down his slick driveway, tumbling onto the grass. This video has been viewed more than 44 million times since it was posted on Tuesday. Oof. Fortunately, the man suffered no injuries except for the bruised ego. And down he goes. That's all for us tonight. Be sure to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And remember, I'm Waters, and this is my world. One more time, we're gonna celebrate. Oh yeah, all right, don't stop the dance.
Evening, everyone. Welcome to The Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and this is the home of positive populism. Tonight, we've got an amazing panel here to break down all of this week's top stories. The man with all the inside information, Ed Henry, he's here, along with Lisa Booth, Jason Chaffetz, and Lucy Flores. We'll investigate Google's liberal bias, find out if everyone on our panel buys the notion that a wrong button push triggered a statewide panic in Hawaii, and see how the D.C. swamp reacted to the president calling for, of all things, the return of earmarks. But first, some hard truths on immigration. Let's get right to it. The elite are up in arms about President Trump's Oval Office remarks, but whose fault is it that Americans are so angry about immigration? Consent for immigration depends on control of immigration, and we haven't had that for decades. That's hurt our economy and our social fabric, and Democrats used to agree with that. Here's Barack Obama in his book. When I see Mexican flags waved at pro-immigration demonstrations, I sometimes feel a flush of patriotic resentment. When I'm forced to use a translator to communicate with the guy fixing my car, I feel a certain frustration. And here's Bernie Sanders talking about how open borders help the rich. Bringing in all kinds of people work for $2 or $3 an hour, that would be great for them. I don't believe in that. I think we have to raise wages in this country. I think we have to do everything we can to create millions of jobs. You know what youth unemployment is in the United States of America today? If you're a white high school graduate, 33%, Hispanic 36%, African American 51%. You think we should open the borders and bring in a lot of low-wage workers? Or do you think maybe we should try to get jobs for those kids? The fact that establishment Democrats won't even say that today shows just how much they've abandoned the working class. Second point, to use the word of the week, Democrats don't give an S word about the Dreamers. If they really cared about the Dreamers, why didn't they do something about them when they controlled the White House and the Congress? If they really care about them today, why don't they agree to the deal President Trump put on the table? Protect the Dreamers, build the wall, end chain migration, and the visa lottery. Instead, they've made a no-compromise position into a political litmus test. Here's their deputy party leader on Friday.
That's right, a Clean Dream Act, and there cannot be one single politician in the state of Pennsylvania who is in a state of confusion about how you feel. We're going to make it perfectly clear to all of them on a repeated basis. And yes, we have a litmus test. If you are a Democrat who doesn't like a Clean Dream Act, you're going to have some problems.
Democrats will dump the Dreamers if it means they can block President Trump's signature election promise. And that leads to the third point. The Democrats' total opposition to the wall undermines our democracy. What the hell do you think the American people will make of a political system that can't even deliver an incredibly simple, clear promise like build the wall? That would destroy what little faith is left in our government. And the Democrats, who love to lecture everyone else about democratic norms, well, they would be responsible. Finally, you know what the real long-term solution to immigration is? Deal with the fundamental problems that are pushing people to migrate around the world in record numbers, encouraged by instant global communication and enabled by cheaper global travel. That's not about race, it's about global inequality. It's about the failure of so many countries in the world, and yes, many of them are in Africa, the Middle East and Latin America, to offer their citizens hope and opportunity. Right now, America and other rich countries like the UK hand out hundreds of billions of dollars in aid to those countries, only to keep corrupt and failing regimes in place. We need to use our influence to help those countries get richer. That means promoting the institutions of a free society and a market economy, property rights, asset ownership, the rule of law, a free press, independent judiciary. Stop funding corrupt and failing governments until they put those institutions in place. That is the next revolution we need. Please tell me what you think. Follow us on Twitter and have your say at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. And now let's find out what our panel think. With me tonight, Fox News contributor and Washington Examiner columnist Lisa Booth, former Utah Congressman and Fox News contributor Jason Chaffetz, former Nevada Assemblywoman and VP of Public Affairs at Me Too, Lucy Flores, and finally, he's here, Chief National Correspondent and author of 42 Faith, the rest of the Jackie Robinson story. Ed Henry, you've forsaken the frozen corridors of
the frozen tundra.
Exactly.
The frozen swamp.
And here in glorious sunshine at LA. Great to see you. Great to see you all. Lisa, I want to start with you on this immigration story. Take which aspect of it you like, the president's remarks or the policy side. Where do you think we are this weekend?
Can I touch on both? Well, I think a lot of people on TV just want to use it as an opportunity to curse, personally, but as we've seen watching some of these other networks. But I mean, look, the point President Trump was trying to make, you look at a country like Norway, and he also mentioned Asian countries allegedly as well in the meeting. You look at a country like Norway, it's one of the richest countries in the world. And he was talking about Haiti in reference to the fact, I think it's the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. So I think that was where he was coming from, along with what he has said previously and wanting to look at things like merit-based immigration and bringing people over here to the United States that can bring certain skill set to the country. So I think that was the reference point of what he was talking about. Of course, people that don't like the president or already view him as racist is going to use an opportunity to extend that conversation. In regard to the actual immigration policies, look, I think Democrats and the president are pretty far apart about what they want to accomplish. President Trump has obviously said the wall, ending chain migration, ending the visa lottery. And then I think you have people like Senator Dick Durbin and others who simply aren't going to take some of those pieces of policy. So they're pretty far apart. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here in the next couple of months and where they end up, if they end up anywhere.
So you've got a lot of experience on this issue, trying to get this kind of thing through and observing what's happened in the past.
Well, President Trump has already taken it further than Barack Obama ever did. I was elected same time as Barack Obama. I actually sat on Judiciary, and I was on the Immigration Subcommittee. When Zoe Lofgren, the Democrat from California, was in charge of that committee for 2 years, they had 2 meetings on immigration. One was to have a photo, and the second one was to hear testimony from Stephen Colbert. That is the total. Literally true. That is the total sum of everything that the Democrats, when they had all levers of power, did. And the fact that the president's actually talking about it, and the Democrats don't even want to show up and don't want to have this discussion is just shameful, because I do think there is common ground. I do think we can actually solve these problems. But the Democrats have got to be there and actually willing to work with the consequences of an election that gave all the levers of power down to the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, look, Lucy, there's so many angles on this I'd love to explore with you. There's the whole kind of Bernie Sanders populist take and the impact on jobs and incomes. But I'm really curious about I really genuinely want to understand why Democrats are so opposed to making the wall part of this deal. Why not just accept that in order to get what they want for the Dreamers? That's the bit I just don't understand.
Because you're talking about an expense that is in the trillions, estimated to be in the trillions of dollars for a wall that's unnecessary. That's the point. You're not against Dreamers because you're not for spending unnecessary tax dollars. What we need, and I'm not going to spend any time talking about those comments, what we need is comprehensive immigration reform. We have not reformed our immigration system for decades. That includes visas, tech visas. Every aspect of the immigration system needs to be fixed if we dealt with that foundational issue. And yes, also talked about what's necessary as far as enhanced border security on all of our borders, whether that's coastal borders, the Canadian border, the Mexican border. I mean, we have not actually had that. And you know what? I'm not going to sit here and blame Republicans or Democrats, because they've both been responsible for this. So I mean, rather than being so polarized about it, my God, this is one of the most frustrating conversations to try to have.
No, okay, but this is why I just want to cut a little bit back to the wall thing, because, okay, I don't think anyone's saying it's trillions, but it's certainly a lot of money. And they're asking for the money. I think I've heard the figures were 18 billion, something like that.
I think that's what the president asked for.
But okay, I'm going to give you that, right? I just want to give you that it's not needed and it's a waste of money. Why isn't it, for Democrats, a price worth paying to get the DACA deal done to help the Dreamers? Why not just accept it?
Right, because that's saying, okay, well then let's just throw away money for some other, the bridge to nowhere, in order to come up with a deal for not drilling in the Native American.
Cared about the Dreamers,
that is not an apples and oranges
Hang on a second, I just want to let Ed jump
First
in.
of all, Jason Chaffetz owes the American people an apology because that Stephen Colbert meeting moved the ball forward big time. No, I'm just kidding. That was funny. I like that. In all seriousness, what we need to do is follow the law. How about that? And one of the reasons I'm told from people inside the White House where the president got inflamed and used some of these comments is that the deal that they talked about on Dreamers was not just about the kids. We've heard for a few years now from Barack Obama and others, oh, these poor kids, they came over through no fault of their own. Do you know the current deal on the table includes not just the kids of the illegal immigrants who came over and knew what they were doing, knew that they were breaking the law. It includes the parents who broke the law. And so now what kind of precedent, if you pass this deal, do you set for the 11 or 12 million illegals here to say, well, the parents of the Dreamers who came over illegally, they got not citizenship, but some sort of status to stay here that's being negotiated. That opens the door to all kinds of
Well, I
problems.
think that's the thing. You see, you talk about comprehensive, but isn't that one of the problems, that the minute you get into all this sort of massive comprehensive thing, you lose all the elements, whereas this quite tightly drawn deal, Dreamers will... chain migration visa lottery. Actually, there's constituency for that.
I would push back and say, why not negotiate a clean Dream Act? If we're not going to talk about anything
because
else,
the problem is, as Stephen mentioned, we're also talking about...
I want both of you to quickly jump in. Yeah, Lisa?
Look, I think if we're talking about this, we also need to figure out ways to prevent further illegal immigration. I think that's why President Trump wants to look at things like chain migration. He also wants to look at visa lottery, so we're not adding on to the problem where we're having to deal with this in another 5, 10, 15 years. So I think that's where President Trump is coming from. But in regard to the wall, I mean, Democrats have voted, you go back to 2006, voting for the Secure Fence Act. So Democrats like Dianne Feinstein, Senator Chuck Schumer, Biden were all for a physical barrier along the southern border. Now, President Trump is talking about a physical barrier along the southern border, different context and talking about a wall, but essentially the same premise of having a physical barrier.
That's such a good point. And look, surprise, surprise, we are out of time talking about immigration, but that's more to get you. Thanks to all of you for that. But coming up, when you Google something, are you just helping to fund the tech giant's anti-conservative bias? We investigate. And next, guess who's helping the rich pay less tax? Hint, it's not the Republicans.
When you have a cold, stuff happens.
Welcome back, everyone. We have been having a fantastic and furious immigration debate right here. As I said, we need to do a whole show on it. There's so much to say.
I'm going to hold you to that.
No, I really mean it. I think it would be great. We really should. Okay, you're listening in New York. Right. In my opinion piece on FoxNews.com this week, I wrote about how the Democrats have moved from the party of working Americans to become cronies for the richest of the rich. Here in California, in response to the new GOP tax reform, Senate Democratic leader Kevin De Leon is fighting for the right of the richest Californians to evade their taxes. He's proposed setting up a new so-called charity that would let the richest Californians recoup their losses from the Trump administration's new tax reform. That's after Nancy Pelosi described $1,000 worker bonuses as crumbs. So have the Democrats become the party of the elite? Let's ask the panel. Let's start with the congressman here.
Well, it is absurd that really they're trying to craft a piece of legislation in order to can make this faux charity so that they can make tax reform, more palatable to them. I really do believe, though, that these $1,000 bonuses and $500 Democrats are so out of touch. That makes a real difference in real Americans' pockets. And you know what really helps is the youth, the kids, the children. I want youth to be able to get back to work and have those rich experiences and get a bonus every once in a while. I think it'd be great.
So, Lucy, we've had this conversation before, but you keep seeing evidence of it. It seems to me that the establishment Democrat, not the Bernie Sanders populist wing. I think there's a lot which you you'd say you'd represent, but you certainly were on that side in 2016. And it seems to me that that's exactly where the mainstream Democrats went wrong, in not listening to that message and allowing themselves to be portrayed as more interested in the rich and the elites on the coast rather than working Americans. They keep making this mistake, don't they?
I do agree that words are important and context is important. As far as what's happening in California, the The reason why that's occurring is because in only the states that have personal income tax, those are the states that are getting penalized. I am not rich. But in order for me now to be able to deduct my state income taxes that I'm paying, I'm not going to be able to take that full deduction. Trust me, I am by no means rich, but I am being negatively affected by this tax reform. And so that is what's happening as far as the structure to try to deal with the few states that are now not going to those of us who are living in those states who cannot now take that deduction.
The vast majority
That's not fair.
The vast majority of the previous benefit from the federal government did go to the richest, and that's what they're trying to undo.
But then you talk about the entire tax system, and in terms of the crumbs, that's where I think using that language, that's where I think context is important too. Did she say the wrong thing and it came out wrong? No, I would agree with that. But no, wait. Let me finish.
Yes.
Because in comparison to what the uber wealthy are getting, it is crumbs.
Which is Nancy
You're
Pelosi.
talking about, that's fine, but you're talking about an average of $800 in a return for people making $50,000 to $75,000. People over $1 million, $34,000
No, I get that, Lucy, but the point is that
savings from their tax.
The point is that for
compared
decades,
to that, that's crumbs.
Literally decades, people's incomes have been going down, and at least this is an increase.
Well, I was going to say welcome to the not rich club because we're hanging out in that together. Right. But you know who's not hanging out in it is Nancy Pelosi, and that's why this crumbs comment sounds so out of touch from her. I think she's worth around $26 million. So, of course, to her, $2,000 of savings is crumbs. But you know what? If you're a family of four making around $75,000, saving $2,000 is not crumbs. That is real money that is going to help you pay the bills and help advance your family and to provide a better life for your children. So that's certainly not crumbs. And you even have liberal groups like the Tax Policy Center, right? Yeah. Said that 80% of Americans are going to receive a tax cut, and I think it's even upwards to 90%, depending on who you're talking to. So this is real money for hardworking Americans.
When you were saying $800 doesn't matter, you said $800 doesn't matter to a middle-class family. I covered Barack Obama. 2012 campaign, he had a payroll tax rebate. He made a big deal, and the congressman will remember, hashtag $40. That's what you got, $40 in your paycheck. And the Democrats said, this is a big deal. Talk about crumbs.
I think she said it, actually.
Democrats spent, remember, when Barack Obama came in and they did the stimulus, $787 billion. And most people didn't even feel it. And Ed's exactly right. They were bragging about $40.
And now you've got all these companies saying $1,000 bonus.
I think there's a really, hang on, Lucy, just to say, there's a fundamental thing here, I think, which is that you say what you want about the Trump administration, and you do. The one thing I think that it seems to be going pretty well is the economic story. And there's a political problem for the Democrats, because good news for American workers is bad news for the Democrats politically. I don't think they figured out how to handle that.
Well, the economy is doing better, but in terms of wealth inequality, we still not have seen the increase in those wages. So we still have to deal with that. And I think that is fundamentally, again, why populism has the rise that it does now, right?
That's right.
But I certainly don't want to say that $800 is not a big deal. Of course, I recognize that that's a big deal for struggling families. But again, why does the disproportionate amount of that go to the uber wealthy
we've got to leave it there.
To people making so little?
We've got to leave it there. But if I just, on a note of agreement, I totally agree with you that we've got to tackle that wage inequality that's been a feature of our economy for way too long.
Yes.
Thanks all. Coming up, we investigate liberal bias at Google that you have to see to believe, and a truly radical plan for shrinking the federal government. We'll tell you all about it next. Welcome back to The Next Revolution. With government spending out of control and the national debt rising every minute, some are floating a radical solution, cutting cabinet departments from 15 down to 4. Our own Anita Vogel has more on this revolutionary idea. Take a look.
When the Founding Fathers sketched out the Constitution, they created a pool of key advisors to the president known as the Cabinet. Originally, there were 4 cabinet officers overseeing departments: a Secretary of State, a Secretary of War, now Defense, Secretary of the Treasury, and an Attorney General. Today, the Cabinet has grown from 4 to 15 executive departments.
The existence of those 4 departments is a guide to what the federal government was established to do.
Larry Arnn is the president of Hillsdale College in Michigan, one of the only colleges that refuses federal funding. He argues the country could easily be governed with the original 4 departments.
I believe very much in the government. I just think the government should be limited, and it's more or less unlimited today.
Opponents say the idea of cutting any departments could be disastrous for lower-income communities, even though some agencies, like the Department of Education, weren't created until 1979.
What will happen is we'll move down this path of schools starting to fail, no accountability measures put in place that these agencies provide, and then the real losers will be the children, the future of this country, future doctors, future lawyers.
But maybe there's a compromise. One think tank in Washington put out a position paper aimed at shrinking the federal government by cutting 7 different agencies, including 2 cabinet-level departments, the Department of Commerce and the Environmental Protection Agency.
These departments are a drain on the nation, not a benefit to the nation. And if we can get rid of them, then we're sure to see an economic boom as a result.
The Competitive Enterprise Institute insists the burden of overregulation is costing the nation as much as $2 trillion a year, translating to $15,000 a year for the average family.
If households only had half of that, $7,500 extra each year, then you can imagine how much of a benefit that would be to the economy.
But that doesn't add up for opponents who say if the Founding Fathers were alive today, they might argue for more government help, not less.
I'm all for eliminating waste and cutting fat off the bone, but in a lot of cases, these agencies are literally operating at the bone. And so when you cut into the bone, you're really cutting into the core functions of the core functions of our government.
In Los Angeles, Anita Vogel for The Next Revolution.
Thanks, Anita, for that. So, Ed, look, we hear all the time, like, every incoming administration, we're going to cut the waste, we're going to make things more efficient. You've heard it forever. Nothing ever happens. The bloated bureaucracy just grows and grows and grows. I remember when I was working in government in the UK, we had the same problem. And I came to the conclusion that you can't actually reform it. You just have to take drastic action to cut it. By the way, that doesn't mean that you just don't have any of those functions. It just means that you decentralize them to places where it's done better.
Somehow, if you have an education department, that's how you make education better. And oftentimes, government bureaucracy may or may not actually help. This is long overdue to reform it. Definitely, you need to do some shrinking. Barack Obama talked about it at the end of his administration. One of the reasons he didn't accomplish it is because of some of Jason's colleagues in the Democratic and Republican ranks who have oversight over these departments. And if you get rid of these agencies, they have less power. They have less oversight. So some of these lawmakers want to be able to have oversight over the Commerce Department and the Weather Service and all the like. And frankly, I think maybe this is one way the president can finally get rid of the Attorney General. He's been very angry with Jeff Sessions. It might be an idea. No, I'm just kidding.
So look, we talk about draining the swamp. It seems to me that this is actually a crucial part of it, because one of the reasons, I mean, you'd be familiar with this, you have all that lobbying and corruption going on in DC, is precisely because the government is so sprawling. If you shrunk it down, you'd get rid of the opportunity for all that lobbying.
We have too many people, and we're paying them too much money. We have more than 2 million federal employees. Those 15 cabinet level oversee about 320 different departments and agencies as subsets. A lot of this should be done at the state level. I wholeheartedly agree that we do not need a Department of Education, and that the 60 or so billion dollars that flows through them, get rid of the middleman. Put that money, let it follow the kids. We're not saying that the money wouldn't go to education, but we don't need thousands of people in Washington, D.C. in order to educate kids in Las Vegas or Salt Lake City or Chattanooga, Tennessee. You don't need that. And so I do believe that it has a lot of merit. The biggest offender is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that the Democrats put into place. And the scary thing for Americans has to be that is funded not through Congress, not through appropriations, but the way the Democrats did it is it's being paid for by a different department, a different agency called the Federal Reserve. And we don't have the oversight. It's a funding mechanism and a regulatory body. But I do give a lot of credit to Donald Trump for actually cutting back regulations. But let's actually cut the department and agencies.
Because they're the ones, because they're the ones churning it all out. I mean, Lisa, this has been a sort of thing that on the right has been talked about forever. Do you see any signs of the kind of radical action that we've heard about just now?
Well, I think we did see some instruction from the Office of Management and Budget to agencies like the State Department to roll back some of the staff and, cut back a little bit And I think every agency head, every cabinet member should be forced and tasked with trying to rein in their individual fiefdom, right? Roll in their agency and cut staff, streamline the process. Because I think we can all agree at this table that government is not known for its efficiency. So there are a lot of ways that you can do more with less. But also the problem with that, as you had mentioned, the lobbyist and the fact that once a government program is created, it's very hard to roll back. We even saw that with Obamacare. And despite Republicans promising for 8 years that they wanted to repeal Obamacare, didn't get it done.
Yes.
So it's very difficult to take something back once it is given or once it is created in Washington, D.C.
So, Lucy, would you support this if we just said, look, we're not even trying to cut, we're not trying to make cuts here. We're just trying to redistribute. We're trying to take the power and the decision-making from the federal bureaucracy and put it not just to states, but actually even closer to people than that. Would you then be in favor of it?
Listen, I am all, you know me, I'm in favor of anything that's reasonable. And I have certainly seen my fair share of just ridiculous, makes no sense type of activity from all of those departments, especially the Department of Education. I mean, those, we called it race to the bottom, but the funds that were competitive, I mean, you had consultants making money out of the wazoo, just putting together these 100-page proposals to submit to the Department of Education just to get some money, to hopefully win some money. I mean, made no kind of sense. I think two things here are really important in order for this to actually, you know, make this palatable for people is one, we have to talk about accountability. You know, at the end of the day, you talk about getting rid of the EPA, but we still need accountability when it comes to protecting the environment. Who is going to be the person that ensures that these things are happening?
I agree,
and the other thing is then what happens in terms of, you know, the actual function? Like, what's the plan when we get rid of all of these departments?
Yes,
if we did those
sorry,
things,
we've got to leave it there. But
I think we would
actually,
have
that's
a good
really
deal.
smart because you've got to have. It's not just about cuts. It's actually about real reform. I don't see any sign of it happening. I think that's the big revolution that we can look to the president who talks about draining the swamp. This is what we need to see. Anyway, thanks all for that. After the break, inside the hate-filled world of Google, we'll bring you shocking details like this. Okay, so we are working on an explosive swamp watch for you on the Clinton Foundation. That's coming next week, and you will not want to miss it. Tell your friends, set your DVRs. Swamp Watch takes on the Clintons. It's going to be a big one. Tonight in our Swamp Watch slot, we've got something a bit special. Now, we all know Silicon Valley is run by the left. I certainly know because I live there. But this week, we discovered it's not only full of liberals, it's full of liberals who truly despise anyone who is different. The lawsuit filed by former Google engineer James Damore includes multiple examples of actual conversations between Google employees, conversations that reveal the toxic hate inside that company. Tonight, we're going to show you those messages for the first time. Right here in Southern California, Disneyland famously bills itself as the happiest place on Earth. On the basis of this new evidence, the question tonight is whether Google is, in fact, the most hateful place on Earth. We took a close look at the paperwork in this week's lawsuit and found truly shocking examples of hateful treatment and deeply held contempt for anyone who dares question the liberal elite worldview. Google employees use an internal service called MemeGen to create messages that are communicated inside the company. It's supposed to be for sharing ideas and information, but when it comes to politics, its main function seems to be to share vicious, anti-conservative bile, like this little charmer. And a reminder, these are all directly from the Damore lawsuit. Do you ever wish you were a corporation or a fetus so Republicans would finally treat you like a human being? Or try this one. People in Indiana are bigots, but they don't call it bigotry. What do they call it? Religious freedom. These Googlers, as they like to call themselves, seem to have a thing about religion. Legitimate worldviews, conservative Christianity. I admire your tolerance, but pairing those two phrases still sounds like an oxymoron to me. And again, if you express a dunderheaded opinion about religion, about politics, or about social justice, it turns out I'm allowed to think you're a half-wit. I'm perfectly within my rights to mentally categorize you in my D-head box. Is that a new feature on Gmail? Whatever. Looks like an awful lot of Americans are being put in that category. Listen to this. A majority of people who identify themselves as Republicans also believe the Earth is 10,000 years old. Therefore, by logical deduction, I personally believe that a majority of self-identified Republicans can be placed in the bucket category of idiots or uneducated, and I'm not afraid to say it. A bucket of idiots, eh? Remind you of anyone? Oh yes, here we go. I think of all Trump supporters are deplorable for backing an openly racist candidate, but that's none of my business. Well, at least that person's right about that. Didn't stop the Google anti-Trump onslaught, though. I'm just going to remind everyone that some of the people who work at Google voted for Trump. Unfortunately, that puts them at odds with basic human decency. Well, of course it does, if you're at Google. After all, quote, the choice to be a Republican is the choice to align yourself with a white supremacist, xenophobic regime. And as everyone knows, America First is a slogan for American Nazis. Now, as we know, liberals are all about tolerance and diversity, so when some people inside Google objected to this kind of thing, their colleagues supported their right to speak out. Oh, wait, come on. It's Google. No free speech at Google. Quote, yes, this is silencing, wrote one Googler. I intend to silence these views. They are violently offensive. Another said, I will never ever transfer you onto my team. Ever. I don't care if you are perfect fit or technically excellent or whatever. I will actively not work with you, even to the point where your team or product is impacted by this decision. I'll communicate why to your manager if it comes up. I guess that's what happens when a Silicon Valley tech person comes across someone with a different worldview. Their head explodes, and they ask questions like this. Dear Trump supporters, I keep hearing people feeling unsafe about supporting Trump. Please help me understand how, as a rational person, as a Googler, anyone could possibly support Trump. That's right, half of America. How could you? By the way, don't get any ideas about asking people in Silicon Valley to respect your political choices. If you feel uncomfortable around people who do not share your beliefs, you need to reevaluate them, not pressure others into assuaging you. Reevaluate? What kind of outfit are they running over there at Google? Some communist re-education facility? It could even be worse than that. Check out this exchange about handling Donald Trump's victory. How do people cope with this? I've never been part of a military or war effort before. I guess I can be useful as IT support or for hacking, but my emotions keep swinging between despair and anger, and I don't know how useful I'll be. You won't believe the answer. Get in touch with your friendly local Antifa. Don't try to do this alone. There are people who've been fighting neo-Nazis for decades. They are nice people, generally. So, Google employees are telling each other to go and join Antifa. Wow, that is some change from Don't Be Evil. Of course, Google's anti-conservative ranting and raving wouldn't be complete without a ritual attack on this channel. If I wanted to work somewhere where white nationalists, racists, climate deniers and misogynists were supported as viewpoints worthy of protection, I'd find a job at Fox News or in the Trump administration. Oh, really? Well, thanks for letting us know. What a bunch of hate-filled bigots seem to work at Google. And it's something we should all be concerned about. Look at this typically condescending comment. Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. Well, here's my version of that meme. Never underestimate the power of hateful people in large tech companies. Because the serious point about all this is that the contempt for conservatives inside Google translates into real discrimination and harm outside Google. Think about it. How many times a day do you do a simple Google search? Those instant results you get back are generated by algorithms. Algorithms written by people. People who are overwhelmingly liberal. And as we've seen tonight, hateful. Coming up next, who's really to blame for that outrageous Hawaii false alarm? And did our Drain the Swamp president really call for the return of earmarks? Don't go away.
We are the TV doctors of America, and we may not know much about medicine, but we know a lot about Trump.
An employee pushed the wrong button. State lawmakers plan to hold hearings on the mistake on Friday, but what about all the people on Hawaii that suffered through 38 minutes of thinking they were under attack? Here's Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard describing what one father had to go through.
I was hearing from people all across the state yesterday telling me what they went through when they got that alert. And one was a father who had two kids who were in different places on the island. And he had, in those seconds, to make a decision about which of his children he was going to go and spend the last minutes of his life with.
I mean, look, we make jokes about pushing the wrong button, but I mean, it's really serious and awful for people. You had a point of view about this.
I mean, it was horrific, and it was a circus comedy of errors in a very serious situation. I have a really hard time believing that this was just somebody bumped into a button or hit a button accidentally, and then it takes more than a half an hour to turn it around. Yeah. And you're telling me that it's just one person who can make this small of an accident? I'm telling you, on the surface, I just don't believe that. And what if it was an incoming missile? What if they did need to get other information out? What if something did hit Kauai and they needed to communicate with Maui and Oahu and the big island of Hawaii? Well, are you telling me that they had to go through all these gyrations? I don't believe any of that. And I think somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, she's a Democrat. I totally trust and believe in her. I don't agree with her on everything. Go walk through the system and show somebody like Tulsi, because I think you'll find out that this was not necessarily true.
I totally agree. Look, there's not much more to say about it now because we don't have the information, other than to note that this is not a joke. It was incredibly serious and really, really emotionally disturbing for Hawaiians, and I do hope we get to the bottom of it. I just want to turn to something else now and play something that President Trump said earlier this week that many people also found quite shocking. Listen to this.
Maybe you should start bringing back a concept of earmarks. It's going to bring you together. You're going to do it honestly. You're going to get rid of the problems that the other system had, and it did have some problems. But one thing it did is it brought everyone together. And this country has to be brought together.
So, Ed, come on then, tell it what. Just to be
he has to make a better case than that.
Okay, just for the benefit of those, just what are earmarks?
So earmarks are these targeted spending projects that lawmakers in both parties could send. I've got $100,000 that's going to go to the bridge to nowhere, or in that case, millions of dollars. And people got very frustrated with it. But I think that the fix for it didn't actually fix it. What they did was they said, you can no longer have earmarks. And it's made it harder for the president and leaders in both parties to sort of throw a bone to somebody, so they'll vote for repealing and replacing Obamacare or for the tax cuts. But and so some people say, well, that's great because we don't want to bring back corruption. No, the corruption's just been changed. So instead of lawmakers having the earmarks, they pass a big bill with $100 million, and then the million and the $2 million gets distributed by bureaucrats in the executive branch who are not Democrats or Republicans answerable to the voters. They're not elected. They're unelected bureaucrats. So here's the answer. Maybe bring back earmarks. They're going to have hearings on this, by the way, in public, which is key. They're not doing this secretly. The president said it out loud. And I would argue that maybe you just bring transparency to it. And so Democrats and Republicans have to say, I was behind that bridge to nowhere. I'm the one who put that money in there. The problem with the system before wasn't the spending or the choices. It was that a lot of it was in secret. And that led to corruption. So if you actually bring sunlight to it, you could actually.
So this is a real plan.
I think it's counterintuitive that you can actually fix it.
It is something. The very first amendment, behind closed doors, nobody was in that room, no reporters. The Republicans actually tried to do this because it is the sugar that makes the medicine go down sweet. And if you would go around the room, and the reason you could pass legislation easier is you'd say, all right, I know you need some help here. What do you need in order to support this bill? That's how earmarks, I think, were abused.
And I think that was the perspective of the president when he made these comments. Because, you have to imagine, put yourself in his shoes in the sense that he is a CEO that goes to the White House. And then you have a government that functions at a very slow rate. You have nothing get done. There's no bipartisanship on Capitol Hill. I think he's very frustrated at the rate of getting things done. And so he's looking back. And as you mentioned, earmarks have been something that leadership uses as leverage to bring people to the table and get people to vote for certain pieces of legislation. So I think he's looking at it from strictly a deal-making perspective.
People were shocked that there was politics going on.
Well,
they're giving out money.
You have a lot of conservative groups.
I think the transparency point is good. Lucy, it's interesting. A while back, actually, before the president put it on the agenda, a very good friend of mine, who actually a big Obama campaign person and a former Capitol Hill staffer, she made the same point, which is that actually, and she sort of slightly blamed Obama for this, which is that actually getting rid of all this stopped the ability to get things done.
Sure. As a former state legislator who's worked in state government, I can tell you that yes, as long as everything, I tend to agree that all of our processes were in the open. We had hearings. We talked about these various projects that we were trying to fund in our districts, and then worked internally with leadership, with our Republican colleagues, to say, listen, I have this really great project, and we would talk about the various things we were working on.
Well, one of
and
them I heard about the Teapot Museum.
Well, I don't know about the Teapot. I mean, listen, somebody made a really great argument for it, maybe. I don't know. But, you know, we had the cowboy poetry in Nevada that was brought up. So,
okay, well, look,
but
your
yes,
earmark, by the way, Steve, for Google, I think is just a bad idea.
Okay, fair enough. Well, on that note, I think let's leave it there. We'll see if it's going to help drain the swamp. But coming up, by far the worst joke you'll have heard this year. Don't want to miss it.